In the autumn of 1971, a 17-year-old girl named Marin Farley vanished without a trace from the peaceful state of Iowa. Days turned into an agonizing search, only to culminate in a grim discovery. Marin's body was found in a secluded forest, resting on the trunk of an old, abandoned vehicle. The local police found themselves entangled in a web of potential suspects. There were kind men who offered to help the young girl, her old friend who checked himself into a mental hospital. A former cellmate of Marin's boyfriend possessed a picture of the girl. The question remained, which of these individuals held the key to this dark mystery? Could the police uncover the truth behind this perplexing crime? Cedar Rapids, known for its beauty and safety, was shaken to its core. The idyllic image of the city of 5 seasons was shattered by the news that a young woman had been found dead, marking a tragic end to a life full of potential. From the outset, the investigation promised to be anything but straightforward, a real challenge to solve. Amidst the mounting difficulties, one tiny clue emerged as a vital key in the relentless pursuit of justice. Around 6:30 in the evening, Cedar Rapids Police Department received a call that would change everything. A woman reported that her teenage son and his friend, while walking along a forest path, had stumbled upon something unsettling hidden amongst the trees. While out hunting squirrels, the boys spotted a woman in the distance. As they cautiously approached, they realized a lifeless young woman was lying in the back of a wrecked vehicle. She was partially undressed, and it was evident that she had been deceased for quite some time. The teenagers were deeply shaken and terrified by their gruesome discovery. Wasting no time, they sprinted home, desperate for help. Minutes later, police officer Roland Eek received the urgent dispatch. He and his partner were in their patrol car when the call came in, directing them to investigate Reaver Road. 2 young boys had reported finding a dead woman on the trunk of a car. The patrol car bumped along for about 50 meters into the dense woods before they found the scene. The first thing they noticed was that the car had been there far longer than the victim. It was abandoned, with weeds and vines already reaching up to the roof. The teenagers' grim discovery was met with disbelief by the arriving officers. Lying on the hood of the car was the body of a young woman. Her skin was pallid, a clear indication that she had been there for a considerable amount of time. Roland meticulously examined the area surrounding the vehicle and the roadside, but found no footprints or tire tracks. He promptly called for backup. The investigators arrived and immediately recognized the scene as a crime site. A closer inspection of the car revealed a crucial clue, one that promised to unravel the mystery of what happened. She hadn't wandered into the woods on her own accord, that much was clear. The absence of shoes or socks, and the unnatural cleanliness of her feet, suggested she had been carried. Police were convinced she was already deceased when her body was placed on the vehicle. The state of her clothing corroborated their suspicions regarding the nature of the crime. Her sweater was pulled up, her shirt was hiked above her bra, and her jeans were lowered past her hips. The disarray of her garments suggested a possible sexual assault. Investigators estimated the girl's age to be between 16 and 21 years old. On her right hand, she wore a friendship ring, while her left bore both an engagement and wedding band. Detectives estimated the body had been in the woods for at least 5 days, perhaps longer. Considering the environment, the remains were remarkably well preserved. Investigators found no identification or clues to suggest the young woman's cause of death. One seasoned officer surmised that there was really only one explanation for hiding a body deep in the forest. It was a blatant attempt to conceal a murder. The location itself spoke of solitude, a place where secrets could easily be buried. Beyond the outskirts of Cedar Rapids, just off a desolate gravel road, lay a scene meticulously staged for concealment. A grim tableau, clearly orchestrated to erase the evidence of a heinous crime and ensure the body would remain undiscovered. Less than a mile away, the city's landfill loomed, casting a shadow of neglect over the seldom-traveled route. As forensic experts meticulously combed the area, the pivotal questions hung heavy in the air. How was the victim subdued, and who harbored such malice as to desire her death? Back in Cedar Rapids, investigators anxiously awaited the medical examiner's findings concerning the young woman found lifeless in the nearby woods. The doctor's grim report confirmed the cause of death: a cerebral hemorrhage, the result of a brutal blow to the head. The expert's grim assessment was that the victim likely lost consciousness from the initial blow. This, coupled with the absence of immediate medical attention, tragically led to a fatal outcome. The physician surmised that the perpetrator, in inflicting the injury, perhaps initially hoped she would regain consciousness. However, upon realizing she was deceased, a desperate decision was made to dispose of the body in an attempt to conceal the crime. The forensics report indicated a chilling detail. The victim had been dead for approximately 7 days prior to the discovery. Furthermore, the suspicions of investigators at the scene were confirmed. Evidence suggested a sexual assault had occurred. The evidence whispered a grim tale of a slow, agonizing demise. To bring the perpetrator to justice, identifying the victim became paramount. Investigators meticulously combed through recent missing persons reports. A week prior, a report surfaced concerning a vanished young woman named Marin Farley. Descriptions of her appearance, coupled with distinctive tattoos on her arm, confirmed the body discovered in the woods belonged to her. The 17-year-old's age and disappearance date aligned perfectly with the medical examiner's findings. It was Marin's manager from a local diner who initially alerted the police. Concern gnawed at her when the young woman missed her third shift. According to the manager, Marin was the epitome of reliability. She was never late and always gave ample notice if she couldn't make it in. When Marin failed to appear, the manager decided to check on her at her dormitory. The apartment seemed undisturbed, nothing obviously amiss, but then she noticed a disturbing detail. Marin's work uniform was missing from the closet. Marin worked as a waitress at Wade's Diner. Known for her dedication and diligence, everyone recognized her as a model employee. Investigators say the last sighting of Marin was on the morning of Friday, September the 17th, as she wrapped up her night shift. By Monday, September the 20th, her manager, alarmed by her absence, contacted the police to report Marin missing. Friends revealed that she had recently moved from Sioux City, a detail that piqued the interest of the investigators. They discovered that Marin Farley had married young. Shortly after the wedding, her husband was incarcerated. The prison where her husband David served his sentence was near Cedar Rapids. Marin secured a room in the local dormitory and found employment to cover her living expenses. She worked as a waitress, allowing her frequent visits to her husband. Typically, she would make the journey to see him nearly every week. However, that particular weekend, Marin did not visit the prison. She was scheduled to meet her husband and attend church on Sunday, but she never arrived and vanished without a trace. No one ever saw her again. Based on the timeline of events, Marin was attacked sometime between her departure for work on Friday morning and her expected return that evening. During the investigation into a disappearance, Officer Cedar Rapids dispatched investigators to Sioux City to interview Marin's mother. This proved to be a critical decision. The woman was deeply worried about her daughter's safety, convinced that something terrible had happened, as Marin would never vanish without a trace. 4 days later, the same officers returned to Mary with devastating news. Her daughter was dead. It was a crushing blow. Mary had suspected foul play, but hearing the news of her daughter's fate left her utterly speechless. The emotions that Marin's family grappled with were particularly poignant, colored by the vivid memories of the girl they knew. Marin was the pride of the Brubaker family, their firstborn and the eldest of 7 children. From a young age, she blossomed into a bright, cheerful, and responsible young woman. Born on the 4th of July, Marin, according to her mother, embodied the spirit of the holiday. She was as radiant as a firework, always living life ahead of her time. Marin was always in a hurry to grow up. She cherished all her siblings, but she held a special bond with her younger sister Liza. Marin always brought her along, wherever she went. The responsibility Marin embraced urged her to mature faster than her peers. She met and fell for David Farley as a young teenager. She was 15, and David was 16 when they decided to tie the knot. Theirs was a love fueled by youthful passion and a touch of recklessness. David, a man of good lineage, was deeply loved by Marin. Their vow of a long and happy life together, however, was shattered when David was caught forging checks. The court sentenced him to 3 years behind bars. Marin's decision to relocate to Cedar Rapids to be closer to him inadvertently led her down a path to a mysterious murder. Investigators were left grappling with scant evidence gleaned from the autopsy and the crime scene itself. It was a meager collection of clues. Even the biological samples gathered during the autopsy held little value until the advent of DNA testing. The investigators knew that the key to cracking the case lay in the search and tracking of Marin's movements leading up to the encounter with her killer. Their initial step was a meticulous examination of her room. They discovered and read her diary and letters, but found nothing of immediate interest. The entries painted a picture of Marin as an idealistic teenager struggling to make ends meet. Nothing seemed to be missing from her room, except for her work uniform. After which, the investigators interviewed neighbors in an attempt to piece together what they remembered from the day of the incident. The superintendent's statement provided the police with an initial lead. She recounted hearing voices emanating from Marin's room. According to her, the voices were calm, a fact that prevented her from suspecting anything amiss. However, she did note that one of the voices possessed a distinctly low timbre. The superintendent also drew attention to another significant detail. The air in the vicinity was thick with the pungent aroma of tobacco smoke, tinged with a subtle sweetness. While the superintendent never saw the man, she remembered the exact time of this happening. The 17th of September marked the day Marin vanished. Investigators scrambled to find anyone who might have seen Marin after the manager overheard her speaking with a man. Sadly, their efforts bore no fruit. No one had seen her or interacted with her after that moment. Marin's family was baffled. Who was the smoker the manager heard her talking to? And who could possibly be a suspect? Everyone loved her, they said. She had no enemies, and never spoke of any disagreements. She was known for her amiable nature, getting along well with everyone she met. The investigation into her murder had stalled, leaving detectives completely in the dark as to the perpetrator's identity. A breakthrough came unexpectedly when one of Marin's co-workers provided a crucial piece of information. She recalled Marin mentioning her plans for Friday evening. She had a date with an old friend from Saucity, a man named Bobby Moore, who promised to take her out, but kept the destination a surprise. Bobby Moore immediately became the prime suspect. Investigators soon uncovered a troubled past, including several arrests. They knew a thorough investigation was crucial. Marin's husband David had pleaded with her to avoid any contact with Moore. He was aware of accusations against Bobby for domestic violence against several women. He warned his wife to be cautious, telling her that Moore had a history of assaulting women. As the inquiry deepened, other significant details emerged. A friend of Marin's revealed that she'd seen Bobby Moore, always slightly disheveled, shortly after Marin's disappearance. He claimed he had come to town to assist in the search for his friend. Investigators found themselves in a bind, desperate to question Bobby Moore, but their search hit a wall. It turned out that on the very day Marin's body was discovered, Moore had voluntarily admitted himself to a psychiatric hospital in Saucity. A wave of suspicion washed over the investigators. Could it be guilt that drove him there? They couldn't shake the feeling that his sudden need for psychiatric care was directly linked to Marin's death. In their minds, he was guilty. However, if Moore believed the hospital walls would shield him from the murder investigation, he was sorely mistaken. Upon hearing the news of Marin's death, he vehemently denied any involvement, setting the stage for a tense and complicated inquiry. He professed to see her as a sister, vehemently denying any involvement in her vanishing. His alibi placed him miles away in Saucity during the crucial time frame. Moore faced the scrutiny of a polygraph test, a challenge that unexpectedly he passed with flying colors, much to the police's surprise. Despite intense investigation, detectives found no solid proof linking Bobby Moore to the murder. However, neither could they fully exonerate him. He remained a suspect in the disappearance of Marin Farley. As the investigation into Marin's murder deepened, detectives cast a wider net, meticulously scrutinizing every man the 17-year-old had interacted with during her 3 weeks at Cedar Rapids. Soon a particular name rose to the top of their list: Harry Cassell. But who was Harry Cassell, and how did he become a person of interest in the case? The connection lay in his past. He had been David Farley's cellmate. Both men had met Marin during one of her visits with her husband. While David remained incarcerated, Harry had been released from prison shortly before Marin's disappearance. In the course of the interrogation, detectives meticulously examined the man's belongings, a search that yielded an unsettling discovery. Tucked away in his wallet was a photograph of Marin Farley. The question that immediately arose was, what connection could this man possibly have to Marin Farley? And why would he carry her picture? Detectives eagerly awaited answers, their minds racing with possibilities. One working theory suggested that the man had become infatuated with Marin during one of her visits to her husband in prison. They were keen to explore this angle. Investigators painstakingly pieced together a timeline of the man's movements from the moment of his release from prison up to the very evening of Marin's disappearance. A growing suspicion began to form. He had developed an unhealthy obsession with her and had begun to stalk her. In the stark interrogation room, detectives turned up the heat on Harry Cassell. Accused of Marin's murder, he vehemently denied any involvement. He claimed he was nowhere near Cedar Rapids on September the 18th, and insisted he had proof. And indeed, he delivered a solid alibi, confirming his whereabouts on that fateful day. Undeterred, the police returned to Marin's apartment, searching for any evidence linking Harry to the scene, particularly to the man the building manager had heard that morning. Yet, their search came up empty. Investigators found absolutely no connection between Harry and the murder of Marin. No indication whatsoever that he was involved in the heinous crime. Castle's inability to explain the presence of Marin's photo in his wallet, a seemingly promising lead, ultimately proved to be a dead end in the investigation. Determined, the investigators revisited the diner where Marin worked, re-interviewing her colleagues and regular patrons. Their persistence paid off. A crucial piece of information emerged. A regular customer named George recalled seeing Marin with a man who fit the description of a hippie around the time of her disappearance. The investigators promptly approached Marin's relatives, seeking to identify a person matching this description. However, Marin's husband, David, swiftly pointed the finger at George himself, urging the police to question him directly. Detectives delving into George's history uncovered the reasons behind David Farley's suspicions. This man had approached Marin with a tempting proposition, claiming connections that could free her husband from prison. Was it a genuine offer of assistance or a calculated move to exploit her vulnerability and get closer to her? He was aware of her troubles and kindly volunteered to fix her car. But law enforcement suspected ulterior motives lay beneath the surface of his generosity. The age gap between them was considerable, with him being 52 and her just 18 years old. George's motives were questioned. Why would a man seek out a young waitress? George explained to the police that during a late-night conversation, he offered assistance to the young woman. He said he was moved by her situation, sensing she faced emotional and financial struggles. The investigators were skeptical. They pressed him, asking about his whereabouts on the night Marin vanished. George stated he was at work. A police inquiry confirmed his alibi. Records showed he worked at the Cedar Rapids bus depot from 1 in the afternoon to 9 in the evening. The investigators' calculations confirmed George's working hours ruled him out as a suspect in Marin's disappearance, forcing them to pursue other leads. In the wake of relentless investigations that spanned years, authorities found themselves at a standstill. By 1972, with every lead exhausted and no concrete evidence in sight, the case was regretfully closed. Despite identifying a string of potential suspects, each one possessed an unshakable alibi, leaving investigators with no path forward. For the Marin family, the stagnation of the investigation was yet another agonizing blow in an unbroken series of heartaches. The weight of their loss was immense. They grappled with the question of where to find the strength to navigate such a profound tragedy. The loss of Marin struck her mother with devastating force. Now a single parent to 6 children, each morning demanded an almost unimaginable resilience as she rose to care for her family. The collective effect of these events left an undeniable mark on their family. Perhaps it was this very pain that spurred Marin's sister, Lisa, to pursue a career in law enforcement. For many years, she used her position to remind her fellow Cedar Rapids colleagues of the impact the unsolved case had on her and her family. A wound remained in their hearts. They longed to know who was responsible, why someone had taken Marin's life. For over 3 decades, Marin's case in Farley lingered within the Cedar Rapids Police Department. However, in 2006, a new investigator took on the investigation, discovering previously unprocessed DNA samples. He took the DNA samples collected from the victim's body and sent them to the laboratory for analysis. The initial findings held promise. In the laboratory, the expert managed to create a DNA profile of a man. Detectives felt confident that the novel evidence and advanced DNA analysis would lead them to Marin's killer. However, a search of the DNA database yielded no matches. The setback caused the investigation to stall for another 9 years. In 2015, Detective Matt Denlinger reviewed the case files and compiled a list of 75 names that had surfaced during the initial investigation. Determined, he intended to collect DNA samples from each suspect. The investigation dragged on, each step a tedious echo of the last. The detective's task was monumental: locate every suspect, secure a DNA sample, and then endure the agonizing wait for results. The process of elimination threatened to stretch into years. To expedite the exhaustive work, he enlisted the aid of retired Lieutenant Ken Washburn and Yates Mitta, a former intelligence operative. Mandus zeroed in on names from the top of the long list, focusing on Dan Linger. In particular, the investigators revisited 2 suspects from the 1970s, eventually tracking down Bobby Moore and obtaining his DNA. He was swiftly removed from the list. When Gory Caslow's DNA also failed to match the profile, the investigation stalled once more. Then, in 2018, a novel form of testing led to the capture of the Golden State Killer. Police were hopeful that this method could be useful in their work. The discussion centered around forensic genealogy, a new technique that had already proven its worth. Investigators were confident that it could help them crack the case. Unfortunately, when they sent a sample to the company, they were informed that it had degraded significantly. The investigators were disappointed, but they did and continued to carefully compare samples. The team resumed their investigation, their focus immediately drawn to George Smith, a seemingly affable diner patron who had previously aroused suspicion. However, upon delving into Smith's background, they discovered a crucial oversight. A DNA sample had never been taken. As the investigators dug deeper into George Smith's past, they uncovered that he had passed away in 2013 at the age of 94. A heartfelt eulogy penned by his friends and loved ones, mentioning his distinct preference for sweet tobacco, caught the attention of investigator J.D. Smith. An old photo of George also gained his interest. The memory flickered back. The dorm manager's words about a sweet cigar scent lingering near Marin's room on the day she vanished. A chilling realization washed over him. That scent meant someone had been inside her sanctuary, and it pointed a finger directly at George Smith. He had lied about his shift at the bus depot that Friday afternoon. In an instant, Smith had become the prime suspect in Marin's murder for the investigative team. His excessive friendliness, once dismissed, now seemed calculated, unsettling. Even the seasoned detectives of the 1970s had found something amiss about him. Now, the police faced the daunting task of uncovering Leon's involvement in this heinous crime. Investigators meticulously pieced together the life of George Smith back in '71. Earlier that year, his marriage had crumbled, ending in divorce. Intriguingly, at the time of Marin Smith's murder, George resided just a few blocks from her dormitory. This proximity suggested he could have easily known her whereabouts and accessed her location. Adding another layer to the suspicion, Smith worked as a garbage collector. This job provided him with intimate knowledge of the route to the very landfill where Marin's body was ultimately discovered. Driven by these compelling connections, the investigators were on the verge of requesting an exhumation, their aim set on obtaining a DNA sample from Smith. The funeral home informed them that the body had been cremated. Cremated remains yielded no DNA, leading to another dead end. Denlinger decided to pursue a different path. He considered various options and wondered if a DNA sample from one of Smith's children could work. Mutter located George Smith's daughter and obtained a sample of her DNA. He sent it to the lab and waited for the results. On September 24, 2021, exactly 50 years after Marin's body was discovered, the DNA comparison results arrived. George Smith, it turned out, was indeed the killer of the 17-year-old girl. The day the results came back felt like more than just a coincidence to the team. Exactly 50 years had passed. Investigators struggled to process the enormity of it all. So did the Marin family when they received the news they hadn't expected for 5 to 10 years. Matt Denlinger still remembers the call he made to Marin's sister. He would never forget Liza's emotional reaction to the revelation. With a simple phrase, she stunned him. "That's my mother." Matt Denlinger was speechless. He hadn't believed Marin's mother was still alive. It was moments like these that had originally driven Matt and his team to become police officers. He was glad to be the one to inform the woman that they had finally found her daughter's killer, even after 50 years. Marin's family was overwhelmingly grateful to the investigators who hadn't given up and had finally solved the case. It was an extraordinary moment, a victory of good over evil. The details of that fateful day when George Smith took the life of Marin Farley remain shrouded in mystery. Yet investigators pieced together a plausible narrative from the available evidence. Their theory suggests George lured Marin to his residence, perhaps with a fabricated offer of assistance, like legal counsel or help with her car. Once she arrived, a sinister impulse seized George. A desire for non-consensual intimacy. Marin rebuffed Smith's advances, and the situation escalated. Something went terribly wrong. He struck her with his head, or perhaps struck her on the head before assaulting her. It was only after this act that the horrifying realization dawned upon him. She was dead. In all likelihood, Smith kept Marin's body hidden within his home until the cloak of night provided cover. Under the veil of darkness, he loaded her lifeless form into his vehicle and drove towards a remote, wooded area. According to investigators, George transported the body in his own vehicle. He then alighted and carried the remains to a ravine, where an old abandoned car rested in the depths of the woods. There, he placed the body in the vehicle's trunk before departing. While the Marin family expressed gratitude for the resolution of the case, the closure dredged up old wounds and stirred memories they had long tried to suppress. Sadly, not all of her kin were able to learn the truth of what happened and who was responsible, as her two brothers and father had already passed away, never knowing the horrible truth. Investigators believe the resolution of a half-century-old murder case sends a powerful dual message. To the victims' families, it offers hope that they should never give up, and to the perpetrators, it serves as a reminder that justice, though delayed, will eventually prevail.